This is the nicest guy in Warhammer. If you agree with me that Batman is a nice guy. Okay, so he's a hideous monster, has an army of ghouls, and lives in a black citadel. Nobody's perfect, and he may not be as dreamy as Robert Pattinson. It's the eyeliner. But he's honestly the nicest guy in Warhammer if you get to know him. And I don't mean in a tips his fedora hat to the ladies, opens a door and expects to get laid kind of way either. Less nice guy and more, murders a lot of people, but they were assholes, so... Look, the guy runs a tight ship, what can I say? Okay, so let me explain. This is Gashnag, aka the Black Prince. And I realize I'm not making a good case for this right now, but stick with me. So he lives here. This is the Borderlands, also known as the Border Prince Confederacy, aka probably a really rubbish place to be, but not the worst place to live. I covered that before. And yeah, it is pretty And for those new to Warhammer Fantasy lore, expect me to say those words quite a lot. Pretty And there are a lot of reasons why this place is so bad. One is that it's, well, the border lands. It's essentially a frontier region. If you look on the map, you can see to its south, there are the Badlands. And oh boy, they're bad. Borderlands, Badlands, Games Workshop are not imaginative when it comes to naming. See, the Badlands are mostly an arid desert that are filled to the brim with orcs, goblins, ogres, skaven, exotic monsters, and even fallen civilizations. Oh, and dragons as well. Can't forget about the dragons. But they're an afterthought. And the Badlands basically serves to lower the property values of the Borderlands. Wrong side of the train tracks. And unfortunately, the things that are in the Badlands, the really nasty stuff, it has a tendency of going north, up towards the Borderlands. It could be ogres looking for food or orcs just looking for a bit of fun, for a scrap. Orcs are kind of like that. They're lovable in their own way. Kind of in a abstract sense, you wouldn't really want to be in front of one. And this means that the Borderlands essentially acts like Satan's alleyway. Everything nasty has to push through there to get to the juicy, supple lands up north. That's where the Empire resides, and it has lots of lovely, arable farmland. Very sweet. So the Borderlands acts like a little bit of a wall, a little bit of a passage for all the orcs, for all the nasties, for all the stuff in the Badlands. Okay, we got it. Borderlands ain't great. And second reason why the Borderlands are so rubbish to live within, unlike the Empire or the Dwarf Kingdoms or Bretonnia, the Borderlands don't really have a stable system of government. There isn't a lot of order. It's kind of more of a, how do we put this? Dungeons and Dragons hellscape. There's no unified nation or government. Instead, it's a collection of petty fiefdoms, small kingdoms, and essentially whatever cutthroat adventurers have determined belongs to them. And all these little different kingdoms that are ruled by various feuding warlords, they're known as border princes. Now, the border princes aren't allied with one another. They're often ruthless enemies. That is, if any of them stick around long enough in order to develop feuds. They don't have a very long lifespan. Typically, they're being stabbed in the back by an underling, or they're stabbing their opponents in the face, and then they're getting stabbed in the face as well. It's basically a very messy place. Governance by stabbing is basically the vibe down there. So let me ask you a question. How stable do you think an area run by rival bandit kings, mercenaries, and pirates could possibly be? Well, if you answered not stable at all, ding 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 ding, we got a winner. As Sap Reinhorf, profession dirt farmer, puts it, aye, we've got a prince. We've had a dozen in just the last year. They're popular in these lands, and he would know. He is a professional dirt farmer. Is essentially an entire realm dedicated to being ruled by the 2-second rule. So it can be tough. If you're not dealing with an army of orcs marching by, you're probably handling some enemy bandits. Or you're being hanged by a rival petty lord. Ambitious adventurers don't exactly make for the best governors, and anyone who has played D&D can tell you that. And so this is where the Black prince comes in. It's funny how Warhammer Fantasy has the capacity to make a hideous monster with an army of ghouls sound really appealing, isn't it? So this guy, Gashnag, he is the son of the Ghoul King. And the Ghoul King was Vorage Bloody Tooth. And as you can probably tell from his name, Vorage was not the nicest guy in Warhammer. Far from it. And he was a vampire. Now there are a number of different bloodlines of vampire in the Warhammer world, and these can best be measured on a catboy scale. So you have the Lamian bloodline on one side of the scale. They are very catboy, and they basically use programmer socks to seduce the hearts of men. Whereas on the other side, you have the Strigoi. These are the opposite of catboys. They are full-blown furry. They got the suits on, except it's basically just how they look. We're talking a lot of fur. A lot of fur. And there's a bunch of different bloodlines in between those two. And even though Vorag was hideous to look at, more like a Vorgag, I'm sorry, he overcame this impediment and managed to earn the title of Ghoul King. So he took a pretty traditional career path, I guess. And he did that by basically assembling an army of ghouls. I don't know how else to put that. I'm not sure how one really orchestrates an army of ghouls. I'm guessing that he created a bunch of Donner Party situations, sort of waited for the ghouls to come to him. And so he got a bunch of these weirdo cannibal, half man, half monster things and brought them to the woods. The Ghoul Woods. Kind of writes itself, this one, doesn't it? Very, very, very clever naming. And I suppose it was at the stage that he brought them to the Ghoul Wood that they crowned him their Ghoul King. That's how he became the Ghoul King. Pretty inspirational. Boy, if only I could get subscribers the same way. Please subscribe, or else I'll Donner Party you. Now, Vorag didn't want to live in Ghoul Wood, which is weird, right? You'd think the Ghoul King would want to hang out in Ghoul Wood. It the Ghoul Wood had been good to him. But Vorag had other plans. See, in the Badlands down south, like I mentioned earlier, there is an ancient civilization. A decrepit and dead one, but ancient. And it is an old vampire city. And without getting into it too much, Vorag wanted it. Historically, it sort of belonged to an ancient line of the Strigoi, a line which Vorag claims descended up, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't really matter. He just wants this city down south, okay? He wanted to restore this ancient realm to its former glory. Everybody needs a hobby. This was his. So he took his army of ghouls and he ventured south into the Badlands. And it didn't go too bad. He actually did okay. You know, him and all his ghouls. The ghouls enslaved a bunch of goblins that were living in the ruins of the city and forced them to work to build a new fortress. The Fortress of Vorag. Yeah, that's the name. I'm sorry, I don't come up with this stuff, alright? There's just a lot of stuff in this universe that just isn't named very well. But this caused Vorag to gain the ire of a nearby orc tribe. And this resulted in him getting killed. He was hit by a ballista in the heart. A pretty good and classic way to kill vampires. So he had a good run. And this is, by the by, if you're playing Total War Warhammer, there is a settlement in the Badlands known as the Fortress of Vorag. You can even build the Tower of Bloody Tooth there. So that's nice. It's nice to be known, it's nice to be liked. And this meant that with Vorag dead, Gashnag, his only child, inherited the title of Ghoul King. Incidentally, this video is making me realize that I really love saying the word ghoul. Ghoul King, ghoul. It's a fun word. So if you're in Gashnag's shoes, what do? Your dad, real nasty guy, big fan of cannibalism, like really into that. Not a phase. Right till the end, he was eating people. Secondly, big slaver, really into that as well. Enslaved a lot of goblins. Not well liked down south, gotta tell ya. Wanted to recreate an ancient and evil vampire society. Do you walk in his shoes is the point. Do you follow what your father had set out to do? Do you enslave a bunch of goblins and force them to build you a fortress of evil? Well, no, he did the morally righteous thing. As morally righteous as is possible in this, the world of Warhammer. Almost said the wrong thing there. Anyone else miss Age of Reckoning? That was a good game. And so as mentioned, the Borderlands, it's full of petty lords, evil adventurers, bandit warlords. Gashnag went there and he found a particularly nasty little king, and he kicked him right out. Kicked him right out. Presumably with not a lot of blood left in his body, more than likely. I mean, Gashnag's a vampire too, right? Of the Leatherface variety. And Gashnag settled down. He settled down in a little citadel beside a little picturesque village. And he rested and he raised some ghouls, as one does. And importantly, he killed anything nasty that would enter his newly birthed realm. And it was his rulership that meant that this township was unusually orderly for the Border Princes. And this attracted some villagers to settle. Now at first, people didn't know about Gashnag and his army of ghouls. Ghouls in general tend to keep to themselves outside of very special moments in their life, like eating. But they often live in sewers, crypts, catacombs, places like that. Out of the limelight. They don't like to be in the limelight. But Gashnag, he's a little different. He is of royalty. And instead of retreating into some dank cave somewhere and just preying on local humans in order to get his blood fix, he instead took a different route. He decided to take an honest-to-God shot at running the place. Now this came with some problems. He knew himself that if he were just to pop out and say, "Hey guys, it's Gashnag," people wouldn't be too happy with that. They'd say, "Oh, it's Gashnag, the hideous monster with an army of ghouls." At that stage, they'd probably run, right? I mean, they wouldn't want to hang out with the Ghoul King. The villagers would not be fans. So instead of simply revealing himself, he decided to start a record label. Seriously. That's what he did. He hired bards, troubadours, and minstrels to sing songs and tell tales about him. They traveled around and grew his fame. And they traveled far and wide to tell these stories. Now, in these stories, he didn't go by his dad's title, the Ghoul King. It's not exactly the most marketable title around. Bit of a hard sell, not gonna lie, for anyone but ghouls and heavy metal bands, admittedly. Instead, he adopted the romantic moniker of the Black Prince. Very sexy, and this gave him rock star status in the old world. So what tales, what stories did these bards sing? Well, rumors were spread that the Black Prince was under a terrible curse. One that causes him to appear as a monster. But that once he was a handsome prince, and that afflicted so he was disinherited from his fortune, and betrayed, cast aside by his very family. But that now, in order to break this curse, he seeks a beautiful maiden to take as his bride. Now that is a good story, a tale as old as time. As a result, now he's pretty famous. He's seen as a romantic hero, very clever on his part. And in order to sell this 90s Disney story, one of their best in fact, he only appears to his very closest advisors, presumably a talking candlestick and clock. And aside from those, he will occasionally appear on the battlements of his castle, the Black Citadel, but he'll only show up at night when Morschleb is highest in the sky, and he wears a thick coat that billows like so. You can't see it, but it's billowing behind me. The Black Prince stands vigil atop the Black Citadel, watching over the peasantry. Basically album art. Now that is obviously not the full story. See, on the down low, Gashnag's army of ghouls, again, I don't know where these people come from. I guess it's just a recruitment agency somewhere. But these ghouls, they act like courtiers and messengers and spies. And they live in the sewers of his castle, so none of the nearby villagers have ever seen them. And they bring him news and carry his messages. And to protect his borders, he commands packs of vicious and hungry wolves. And these animals have a dark intelligence and they report directly to him. And though they are evil wolves, they obey their master, and therefore they never prey on the livestock or villagers of Gashnag's domain. Just, you know, the neighbors. They gotta eat. And admittedly, not everyone likes Gashnag, the Black Prince. Those neighbors, for example, and most of the border princes. See, his realm has gotten a little bit of a sinister reputation. It just kind of happens whenever vampires take over an area. It's the vibe. It's the whole gothic thing. Some people, they just don't get it. They see packs of hungry wolves, they hear about this Black Prince, and they think, let's off this guy. Now, unfortunately for them, it doesn't go well every time they try. There are many nobles and adventurers that have attempted to enter the Black Citadel and defeat the Black Prince. None of them have gotten close to succeeding. I think it's the surprise army of ghouls that typically does them in. That action economy, man, even at level 20, you're still worried about that stuff. And Warhammer Fantasy did not have levels. And Gashnag has ruled his petty kingdom now in this fashion for centuries. Genuinely, it is one of the most stable areas in all of the Border Prince's Confederacy. The place is a miracle. And that's not to say it hasn't had its share of trouble. It's just that Gashnag usually takes care of it in the most violent way possible. Often personally too. He accosts bandits on the road and personally protects travelers. The only time that anyone sees him outside of the Black Citadel is when he is riding out to mete out justice to evildoers. And when he does ride out, he wears a big, thick, heavy cloak, a cape that billows out behind him. This guy is Batman, okay? He's just Batman, and he has an army of ghoul robins. What is the Black Citadel if not the Batcave? This guy's a superhero, okay? Once there was a tribe of ogres, and they were just casually eating their way through the border princes. And that's not a euphemism. These are ogres. They were eating their way through the border princes. Ogres eat humans, okay? And everything else. It's not like they were ruining people's luncheons here. Well, they were, but that was like the least of people's concerns. And they were eating their way towards Gashnag's little piece of pie. And so he rode out. He left the Black Citadel. He rode out to meet them alone on his horse to protect his village. And the very next night he returned to his village and he planted in the village square a dozen stakes occupied by a dozen ogre heads. And this let the village know that they were safe. Once again, the Black Prince watches always. This guy, I mean, he's a bloody good bloke. And that's why now his village is swelling in population. He's got fans and they're showing up to join his Patreon. Speaking of which, you should check out patreon.com/discoursemanagers. Help my village grow. I'm not killing ogres though. I'm not fighting ogres, I'm sorry. If ogres show up, I'm out. And okay, so obviously it's more likely that some random peasant out there, probably called Carrot or something, is the nicest guy in Warhammer. But we got no deets on Carrot. We got no details on him. So in the absence of Carrot lore, I propose Gashnag, the Black Prince, as the nicest guy in Warhammer, and probably Batman. Disagree? Well, leave a comment below, and after that, check out my video here about why Sylvania is the worst place to live in Warhammer. And a huge thanks to my patrons, I really appreciate it, especially my captains, Steven Jackson and Earthwormia. Thank you. And I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye! Games Workshop, the Linda Est.